On an ordinary summer afternoon in 79 CE, the Roman people of Pompeii went about their day, unaware that their world was about to end. Children played in the streets, merchants enthusiastically sold wine and bread, and devoted prayers rose from temples into a clear blue sky. Then, without warning, the ground trembled and the sky turned black. Within 24 hours, many of those same people would be killed in one of the most famous tragedies in the ancient world. However, to understand how such a sudden catastrophe could strike so many innocent lives, we need to look back at the history of this ancient city, how it was built, who lived there, and why they were unfortunately well placed for the terrible disaster. The ancient city of Pompeii is located in the Campania region of southern Italy, situated near the Bay of Naples at the southeastern base of Mount Vesuvius. In the distant past, the site was settled by the indigenous Oscan-speaking people who lived near the mouth of the Sarno River. After its foundation in the 7th century BCE, Pompeii came under strong Greek influence from nearby colonies across the bay, followed by Etruscan control in the later 7th and 6th centuries BCE. After the Etruscans' defeat in 474 BCE, Greek power resurged briefly until the Samnites conquered Campania in the late 5th century BCE. The area surrounding Pompeii benefited from the very nutrient-rich soil of the nearby volcano. It made it an ideal location for the cultivation of grapes, olives, and figs. In fact, Pompeii became particularly renowned for its wine, which was exported in amphorae to regions across the Roman Empire, including Gaul and Hispania. The same volcanic eruptions that had laid the valuable soil in the prehistoric past should have been a warning to those wanting to live in Vesuvius's shadow. However, the abundant crops attracted the attention of regional powers. By the 4th and 3rd centuries BCE, Pompeii had become integrated into the orbit of Rome. It is first mentioned in history during the Second Samnite War in 310 BCE, when a Roman fleet used Pompeii's port as a base. After Rome's victory in their clash with the Samnites, Pompeii and other Campanian cities became allies of Rome. Then, during the bloody social war from 91 to 88 BCE, Pompeii joined the Italian revolt against Rome and was besieged by the Roman general Sulla in 89 BCE. In punishment, Sulla established a colony of veteran soldiers in Pompeii, and as a result the city was thoroughly Romanized in language, institutions, architecture, and culture. By the 1st century CE, Pompeii was a flourishing city of an estimated 10,000 to 20,000 inhabitants. It had gained a reputation as a prosperous trading town and resort, with many elegant villas, fine public buildings such as temples, baths, theatres, and a gladiatorial amphitheatre. Pompeii's coastal location made it ideal for exporting products throughout the Mediterranean. As a result, it attracted many savvy businessmen who were keen to earn profits in the city, and the streets were lined with many busy workshops and stores. Modern archaeologists have identified bakeries, complete with brick ovens, millstones, and even carbonized loaves of bread. Also, there are numerous fulleries, which were wool processing laundries, fish sauce factories, pottery kilns, metal smithies, and vendors of food and wine. In addition, hundreds of private homes, from modest apartments to grand domus, have been unearthed. Perhaps the most important location in the whole city was the Forum. This was the heart of the city and was lined with a range of large public buildings. At its northern end was the Temple of Jupiter. Nearby was the Macellum, or food market, which was identified by its central tholos and fish bones. For many locals, the basilica was the most important structure on a daily basis. It was a large rectangular hall on the western side of the Forum. It functioned as a law court and a place for public meetings. For those alive at the time, the scale and extravagance of the Forum was the clearest indication of the city's thriving economic importance in the Roman Empire. But that was about to change in a sudden moment. Today, the most famous event in Pompeii's history is the cataclysmic eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 CE, which buried Pompeii and nearby towns. The ash and pumice from this event preserved them for centuries. Thanks to contemporary accounts and modern volcanology, we can reconstruct the main stages of the disaster as it unfolded. 17 years after a damaging earthquake in 62 CE that had left parts of Pompeii under repair, Vesuvius roared to life again with little warning. Just after midday on August 24th, the volcano blasted a tall column of debris into the sky. Soon a rain of white-hot pumice pebbles and ash fell on Pompeii and darkened the sky. It is likely that a significant portion of residents managed to escape from the town during these early stages, likely during the initial ash fall. Some wealthier citizens may have had better means to escape earlier, whereas the very old, the infirm and slaves, who made up a large portion of the population, were less able to flee quickly. Those who stayed behind either did so by choice or had no practical means to escape in time. Over the afternoon and evening, this hail of debris accumulated more than 3 metres, or 10 feet deep, burying streets and courtyards, and causing the roofs of many buildings to collapse under the weight. Many residents who had not fled by this time found themselves trapped in buildings or shelters as doorways and streets became choked with volcanic material. In the early hours of the next day, Vesuvius's eruption entered its deadliest phase. The eruptive column began to collapse on itself. This created a series of pyroclastic surges. These were fast-moving, ground-hugging clouds of superheated gas, ash and rock that rolled quickly down the slopes of the mountain. They may have reached speeds of up to 700 kilometers per hour, or approximately 430 miles per hour. Around dawn on August 25th, the first surge reached Pompeii. It didn't carry much ash, but it was extremely hot. Temperatures in the town suddenly soared to over 300 degrees Celsius, or 570 degrees Fahrenheit. This blast and several follow-on surges would have asphyxiated or flash-fried every living being remaining in the city almost instantly. Victims were overcome where they stood, overwhelmed by hot toxic gases and thermal shock before they could even succumb to ash suffocation. The intense heat caused instantaneous muscle contraction, which explains some of the contorted postures seen in many recovered bodies. Even those hiding indoors were not safe. Superheated gas penetrated buildings which proved lethal to people and animals sheltering inside. The majority of victims would have died at this moment. Bones of Pompeii victims exhibit telltale pinkish discoloration and cracking patterns consistent with brief exposure to extreme heat, and household metals like lead or tin tableware were found melted. As the eruption subsided later on August 25th, additional flows of ash and rock poured over Pompeii, ultimately entombing the city under 5 to 7 metres, or roughly 20 feet, of ash and pumice. In total, the eruption deposited a heavy blanket of volcanic debris over the entire area, completely sealing off Pompeii and neighbouring Herculaneum, Stabiae and other settlements. When the ash finally settled, their buildings were filled in and surrounded by compacted tuff. The sudden burial had the remarkable effect of hermetically sealing the city's remains from air and moisture. This prevented the normal decay and looting that otherwise would have occurred over time. The most detailed account of the events at Pompeii was recorded by the ancient Roman writer Pliny the Younger, who watched it unfold from across the Bay of Naples. He was living with his uncle, called Pliny the Elder, at a place called Misenum. This town was far enough away that it was safe from the eruption. However, when the disaster occurred, Pliny the Younger's uncle was the Roman admiral for the region. That meant that he was in command of the nearby fleet of navy ships, and was expected to help out in any such disaster. Upon hearing of the eruption, Pliny the Elder decided to investigate, while his nephew was ordered to remain behind to remain safe. As Pliny the Elder sailed towards the erupting volcano, he knew he was heading into a very dangerous situation. While helping evacuate Roman citizens, Pliny the Elder's curiosity got the better of him, and he sailed close to Pompeii to investigate. Sadly, he was overcome by the dense fumes and died. However, Pliny the Younger survived and later in life recorded his uncle's final hours in a letter to his friend Tacitus, who was a Roman historian. For nearly 1,700 years after 79 CE, Pompeii lay buried and largely forgotten, well protected by its thick blanket of ash. The first hints of the city's existence came in 1592, when the architect Domenico Fontana was digging an aqueduct tunnel in the area. He accidentally struck ancient walls that had paintings and inscriptions on them. Fontana, however, kept the discovery quiet, and the underground water channel he built actually cut through parts of the buried city. Then, in the late 17th century, scholars noted inscriptions referring to a city called Pompeii. They correctly guessed that the lost city lay beneath a local hill called La Civita. However, proper excavation did not begin until the mid-18th century. In 1738, workers were digging foundations for a royal palace at the nearby location of Herculaneum, which was another Roman town buried by the same eruption. There they unearthed spectacular ancient art, which caught the attention of King Charles of Bourbon. 10 years later, in 1748, the Spanish engineer Roque Joaquin de Alcubierre, under Charles's patronage, extended the search to Pompeii. Sadly, early excavations there were essentially just glorified treasure hunts. Tunnels were driven into the debris to extract statues, frescoes and artefacts to decorate the royal collection. However, in 1763, excavators uncovered an inscription bearing the name Pompeii. This finally confirmed the identity of the site. So, by the late 18th century, Pompeii had become an archaeological sensation in Europe. The Bourbon excavators, and later the French during Napoleon's occupation of Naples between 1806 and 1815, cleared large parts of the city. They uncovered the massive theatre, several wealthy homes, including the famous House of the Faun in 1830, which is well known for its stunning mosaics and sculptures, including one of Alexander the Great. However, their methods were crude by modern standards, and many structures were stripped of portable finds, and then reburied or left exposed to the elements. In the 19th century, archaeology at Pompeii gradually shifted from treasure-seeking to more systematic study. Giuseppe Fiorelli became Director of Excavations in 1860 and ushered in modern archaeological methodology. He introduced an orderly grid system by dividing the site into regions, blocks and door-numbered buildings. This recording system is still used today. He made a conscious effort to carefully document all finds. Most famously, in 1863, Fiorelli had noticed the occasional cavities in the hardened ash layer that contained human bones, and he realised these were the exact shapes of victims. He poured liquid plaster of Paris into the voids, let it harden, and then chipped away the surrounding ash. This revealed in 3 dimensions the lifelike form of a person or animal at the moment of death. The haunting plaster casts of Pompeii's men, women, children and even pets made the tragedy very real for the people in Europe. Fiorelli also established an on-site museum and began publishing detailed excavation reports. The locations and groupings of bodies throughout Pompeii tell some powerful stories of the last moments of people's lives. In some places, families or small groups succumbed together while trying to flee. For example, at the Garden of the Fugitives on the outskirts of the city, archaeologists found 13 victims, men, women and children, all huddled in an open vineyard where they were overcome as they attempted to escape toward the Nocera Gate. The positions of their remains suggest they were caught in flight by the surge, some covering their mouths or embracing loved ones. In another location, a group of 4 people died together under a staircase. One adult wore a heavy gold snake bracelet, which may mean that the family tried to save their valuables as they sheltered. In another recently excavated villa bedroom, a woman was found lying on a bed surrounded by gold jewellery and a pile of coins, while a man who was possibly her husband or servant lay at the foot of the bed. They had barricaded themselves in a small room, perhaps waiting for the pumice fall to stop, but were later buried by the final pyroclastic flow when it burst in. Finds like this show that many Pompeians desperately clung to their wealth or took last refuge in their homes as disaster closed in. Perhaps the most valuable discovery is that victims of all ages and statuses have been identified. Overall, the distribution of bodies indicates that no social class was spared. The eruption was an equalizer that caught poor and rich alike. One pair of males found in 2020, initially thought to be master and slave, showed differences in skeletal wear that suggested one was a young man who was clearly accustomed to manual labour in comparison to the older one. What is more, the positions of some of the bodies and the goods they carried also indicated certain social roles. For instance, keys found with some skeletons suggest owners locking up behind them, and the abundance of household gods or amulets on victims hints at the importance of religion to Romans in times of crises. The human remains can also tell us about health thanks to modern analysis techniques. For example, teeth and bone analyses show a carbohydrate-rich diet with surprisingly good dental health. Ultimately, the remains of Pompeii's people provide a rare but direct connection to first-century Roman society. In the 1920s to the 1950s, archaeologist Amedeo Maiuri conducted large-scale digs that exposed nearly the entire city area that is visible today. Many famous structures, such as the Villa of the Mysteries with its exquisite frescoes, and numerous houses and shops, were brought to light under Maiuri's direction. However, the fast pace of these mid-century excavations often outstripped conservation, and record-keeping was not always thorough. After a severe regional earthquake in 1980 caused further damage, a decision was made to largely halt new digs and focus on preserving what had been uncovered. By around 1960, roughly 2/3 of Pompeii's 66 hectares had been excavated, and archaeologists recognised that exposing more structures risked losing them to decay if resources were insufficient for maintenance. Even so, excavations have never completely stopped. For example, as part of the recent Great Pompeii project that was launched in 2012, archaeologists excavated parts of Region 5 that had been long left buried. Also in 2020, the intact skeletons of 2 men mentioned earlier, one elite and one slave, were found in the ash of a villa at Civita Juliana just outside Pompeii. Once more, the human tragedy of the event came to the fore. Pompeii today is at the forefront of using technology for site preservation. Given the vast extent of the ruins, with over 40 hectares exposed, with thousands of walls, frescoes and artefacts under open sky, constant vigilance is required to detect deterioration. Recently, the archaeological park has deployed drones and artificial intelligence to monitor the site in real time. Drones regularly scan walls and structures, feeding images into AI systems that can spot cracks, tilting, water infiltration or new vegetation growth much faster than human inspections. If a section of mosaic floor starts to buckle, or a fresco's pigment begins flaking, the system flags it and alerts conservation teams to intervene before irreversible damage or collapse occurs. Advanced algorithms also help predict which structures are most at risk, so preventative maintenance can be done. I hope that you have enjoyed learning about the archaeological site of Pompeii. If you would like to know more, be sure to check out the free resources on the History Skills website. I look forward to seeing you again soon on our next video.